banks who will tend to go short, and they can go short quite easily because it's just a question of expanding their balance sheets. They just go short. They can print contracts out of thin air. And usually what happens is they do that to the extent where they overwhelm the hedge fund managers. And then, of course, the price gets driven down. Now, recently, we've had quite an interesting divergence between what's been going on in the gold market and what's been going on in the silver market. In the gold market, this level of if you like, outstanding contracts, what we call open interest, has not built up to the sort of levels where you would expect the overall bullishness amongst the hedge fund managers to get out of control, out of proportion, and therefore vulnerable to a massive correction. That hasn't happened yet. But on the other hand, if you look at the silver market, the open interest rate has recently been at record levels. I mean, these are extremely high levels. They indicate that the hedge funds are very, very long of silver, and there you would expect that there would be a shakeout because no bullion bank likes to sit on really enormous losses and losses building as more and more contracts. They issue more and more contracts on the short side to find that they're bought and the price still goes up. Now, in favor of the bullion banks, actually what's happened with silver is that the price has underperformed despite this enormous expansion in open interest rates. So in open interest. So this is a sort of rather unusual situation where on the one hand, you would say in shorthand that gold is not yet overbought, but on the other hand, you would say that silver is very overbought. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I think what it does tell me about the gold market is that the gold market has the potential to rise further before it gets into that technically overbought territory, whereas the silver market, there is something going on which I don't fully understand. I've had a look at the underlying numbers, and I can't even turn around and say that there's someone's trying to corner the market or anything like that. It really doesn't look like that. But if you look at the underlying supply and demand for silver, you can see that silver is demanded. Of that, there is no doubt, and there is probably not a lot of room for investment interest in silver, as it were, in the physical. So it's a funny old game, really, because silver is maybe more aligned with the base metals in the way it's moving, whereas gold is definitely monetary. And that at the moment is an extremely interesting situation with all the geopolitical stuff going on. Plus the fact that the term interest rates in the United States have been falling recently. So gold is, I think, at a very interesting juncture at this moment.
Now, I was wondering, what do you see for the silver market? The open interest is just going super high, but the price of silver isn't really reacting at all. So what do you see for the short-term future of the silver market?
I really don't know what to make of it. What I do know, moving away from the technicals in the futures markets, is I do know that demand for silver is very strong. And it's very strong because China is buying up raw materials, the base metals, the metals it needs for industrial purposes, because it is expanding its economy at a fair clip. I mean, recently they said that their economic growth was running at about 6.9%, which was better than anybody thought. I don't actually place too much credence on these figures, but I think it is indicative of the fact that the Chinese economy is actually growing quite strongly. They are also trying to get rid of excess dollars and US treasuries in return for physical metals, energy, all those things, because of their plans for developing the whole of Asia. So you can see that the demand for silver is there in the physical market, but what I can't quite rationalize in my own mind is why the price isn't higher in the futures market, except possibly it has been depressed deliberately by the bullion banks at someone's behest. Now, that I wouldn't know. That is getting into the realms of speculation. But it certainly smells as if the futures market is sitting on the price while we know that there is very good demand out there from particularly countries like China. And remember, China is now the largest manufacturer of solar panels. That market's increasing very, very sharply. It's also used in chemicals for synthesizing chemicals, and that again is another area where China has been sort of pretty active. And China also refines an awful lot of silver. I expect also that we're seeing jewelry demand in places like India because of all the problems that have been, if you like, brought about on gold by the Modi government. Perhaps the Indians are buying silver. Perhaps silver is being bought elsewhere as well, because it is seen in Asia as a form of money and is therefore attractive on that basis.
Definitely. Now, I'd like to discuss a little bit regarding the situation with Korea right now and how it might impact the precious metal markets. Now, just discussing the situation right now, you've been saying that the Korean situation is escalating out of control and there might be no way to stop it. Can you expand on that?
Well, I think more correctly, I said there is a risk that is how it will be viewed. I think that the North Korean situation is being pumped up by the US government. The fact of the matter is that the North Koreans will be perfectly happy to meet the Americans on the basis that they become accepted more in the global community. We've had so many signals from North Korea that that's what they want. But it is the Americans that have refused to accommodate them, saying that they've got to get rid of their nuclear weapons, they have to stop that program, and so on and so forth. So it's the Americans who are playing hardball. It's actually not the North Koreans. I would say that Kim Jong-un is a very frightened, paranoid dictator. And in that sense, he is probably unpredictable. But the situation could be resolved tomorrow by America just saying, well, let's just back off for a moment. Let's consider this. And perhaps let's have a conference and talk about it. That would give Kim Jong-un the sense of importance that he feels he is lacking, the respect that he's lacking from the international community. So it's actually quite easy to solve. So this raises the question, why is America destabilizing the North Korea and if you like, the whole of that region? Because bear in mind that both Vladivostok and Beijing are within the nuclear fallout of anything that happens in North Korea. So this is a situation which is actually looking pretty dangerous. Whether it escalates any further or not, we don't know. In the past, what tends to have happened is that you get a lot of saber rattling. You get a few missiles launched. Perhaps they attack a fishing boat or something. They attack they do something on the border with South Korea, which is seen as aggressive, and then the whole thing calms down. I think that's what people are hoping this time, but I'm not too sure. I think the Americans are actually a bit more serious about this, which raises the question why they're doing it. And I think they're doing it for an interesting reason, which has been put up by the Chinese military strategists as the way America behaves. Basically, America prints dollars for export, and it makes a lot of money out of printing dollars for export. Obviously, you've got the seigniorage of the raw stuff, and also you've got the seigniorage, if you like, of the bank credit expansion, where U.S. banks lend dollars. Now, one of the regions in the world where there are lots of dollars around is, of course, in the ownership of South Koreans and also the Japanese. So could it be that what America is now doing is that it needs to borrow dollars without raising interest rates in America because of the overall level of outstanding debt? Now, it can do that by making everything else look risky compared with US treasuries. So that's the first leg of it. The second leg of the argument is that we're up against the debt ceiling, and that is a very, very serious, hard fact that Trump is facing at the moment. However, the one way in which you'll get Congress to support an increase in the debt ceiling is in a war situation. So if Trump can go to Congress and say, look, this is a war situation. Hopefully, it's not going to deteriorate into a war, into a real war. But I need the room in order to be able to look after America's interests. So that that I can see as being a very powerful argument, because very few congressmen are going to stand in the way of, if you like, the national interest in that sense. So. This is the way the Chinese strategists are looking at it. They see this as a war being manufactured by the United States to do two things. First of all, to increase the apparent risk on investments in the region. And we're talking about not North Korea, but South Korea and also Japan. And the second thing is that Trump needs to get Congress to agree to an increase in the debt limit. And in a war situation, they will agree a lot more readily than they would without, in a peaceful situation. So that I think is the explanation behind what's happening in North Korea. Now, hopefully that is right in the sense that it's going to go no further than is necessary, if you like, to achieve those two objectives. But it is actually quite troubling in the sense that I think afterwards, both Japan and South Korea will have seen that they have suffered very badly from these actions, which amount to absolutely nothing at the end of the day. And the thought that they will be on side with America in future, I think we've got to take a step back and say, well, their vested interest is to ditch America and actually throw in their lot with China, which is growing rapidly. It's got far more interests. Furthermore, Japanese companies have large investments in China. They've got a lot of manufacturing capacity in China and in Southeast Asia. The whole of that region is actually where Japan's focus increasingly is and will be. And I think the same is also true of South Korea. So I think, this sort of idea of a strategy to pump and dump dollars and recover them, or pump and dump the economies, if you like, of America's friends in order to support the US economy. I think this is the last time that it's going to happen. So it's actually quite a serious situation from that point of view. The underlying thing is that what we're seeing is not a military war, but a financial war.
Now, how do you see this all impacting the precious metal markets?
Well, the precious metals markets are, very heavily managed. I think that's the first thing we've got to say. I think what China is going to do eventually is she is going to basically move commodities onto a gold payment standard. And that she can do quite easily, because what she is doing, the first thing she has done in Shanghai is she has permitted the setting up of Chinese yuan futures contracts in gold. So that what you can do is, if you, let us say, receive Chinese yuan as part of a trade deal and you want to reduce your exposure to it, you can sell it forward on that, or sell the futures and then deliver into those futures and get gold. That's the first thing. The second contract, which was going to be established in this but has actually been put on hold, is an oil contract, futures contract, denominated in yuan. Now, when that comes in, and this is something the Chinese, I think, have realized, and which is why they put it on hold, what will happen is that energy suppliers, for example, in the Middle East, who supply a lot of China's energy now, they are likely to sell their oil to China, receive yuan, and sell those yuan forward for gold. Now they will be able to, once the gold contract, the oil contract is there, as soon as they have got the oil contract, or as soon as they know that they're going to be supplying oil, they don't need to wait for the yuan to be received. They can effectively deal straight through two contracts and receive gold for their oil. Now that puts oil or energy back onto a gold price. And that is going to be absolutely the end as far as the dollar is concerned. This is why the Chinese have held off. They've held off because they are not ready to pull the trigger on that one.
So do you see them holding off for a lot longer? I mean, how long do you think they will continue to hold off and, keep propping up the dollar?
I think that it's. I mean, North Korea, if that starts going wrong, then they could start pulling the trigger to stop America, basically. If, on the other hand, they are just sort of going on their normal course of economic planning, then I suspect it'll be within the next couple of years. One of the things that they will want to do is they will want to sell more of their U.S. treasuries for commodities. U.S. treasuries, as far as they're concerned, have no value. They were just a counterpart of their management of their own currency. So they want to ditch that in return for hard commodities and energy. So I think that's probably something that they will be looking to do over a 2-year timescale. There is not much point in them doing it any more rapidly, because they can't sell them into the market more rapidly. And not only that, but they then have the equation to work out at what price will gold have to be for us to compensate on our losses on our U.S. treasuries and our U.S. dollars in reserve. And, you're then looking at something, you're then talking about a price of, I don't know, take a number out of thin air, sort of $3,000 or $4,000 an ounce. That, you see, that's a bit of a nuclear option. If you're going to do that, you're going to not only destabilize the Western economies, but you're going to create a banking system at the heart of money, the sound money, the banks that owe sound money, the banks that have unallocated accounts for their customers, the banks that owe gold under lease back to central banks. Suddenly the whole situation gets very, very nasty, and bullion banks have to be bailed out, and so on and so on. So that is something I think that, China understands how serious such a move will be. She's not going to do it lightly. In any event, when she reduces her exposure to the US dollar, and when the yuan has become more marketable, that is the time in which she would ideally do it. And I think that's about 2 years away.
Now, on Sunday, there were the French elections. I'd like to move our focus to those because there's potentially a geopolitically destabilizing event that could happen in the near future. With the French elections on Sunday, we saw Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron. It was the first round of voting, and those two basically are then going to face off in another round of voting soon. So what is your perspective on this? Because Marine Le Pen is a far-right candidate who is anti-EU. I was just interviewing John Rubino, and he was saying that if Marine Le Pen won, this could this would be very, very bad for the future of the European Union. What is your perspective right now? It seems like a pretty unlikely chance because polls are showing that Emmanuel Macron would be about 20 points ahead facing off against Marine Le Pen. But what is your perspective if we did see some sort of, like we saw with Trump getting elected and like we saw with Brexit, where the polls were wrong, and there was this upset? If we saw that same kind of thing with Marine Le Pen becoming France's president, what do you think that would mean for the future of the EU?
Well, I think it would be a far greater shock than anything we've seen so far. France is integral to the whole of the EU. The two powerhouses in the EU, through thick and thin, have always been Germany and France. And it was set up that way so that those two countries would never go at war again. So I think that's the first thing to say. Now, looking at the structure of the election, the way the presidential election works in France is it is designed by this two-stage process to eliminate extremists from ever becoming president. And we're seeing this in action now, in that immediately we have a situation where Marine Le Pen, let us assume that she got 30% of the votes, for example. In fact, she got just under 24%. But if she got 30%, and Macron, say, got, let's say, 20 odd, and but there was another one in the running, and they had to have another round. They've got to have another round on the results that have happened. But let's assume that Marine Le Pen was in the lead, and still there would have to be round two. Now, under those circumstances, all the other candidates who have lost would try and persuade their supporters to vote against Marine Le Pen. In other words, they would go for the other guy. If it was a far left individual, again, it would be the same thing. If a communist stood and a communist got to, let us say, sort of evens, joint first, or maybe slightly ahead of number two. Under those circumstances, again, everybody would turn around and say, don't vote for the communist, vote for the other guy. Now, to the extent that they can deliver those votes, and they can to a large degree, not totally, but to a large degree they can deliver those votes, it guarantees that the extremist does not become president. And that's the situation that Marine Le Pen finds herself in. It's not impossible that she will be elected, but I think it's unlikely. Now, having said that, the way I look at the EU is that it doesn't necessarily depend on something which is predictable, like a French election or a Dutch election or even Germany's election coming in later on this year. It doesn't necessarily depend on something predictable like the Italian banking system getting into a crisis. Well, we already know it's in a crisis, but the crisis becoming considerably more manifest. I think what's likely to happen with the EU is it's actually a long process of falling apart. And what we will know is that if Marine Le Pen is denied this time, next time, she or someone like her, anti-EU, would probably have a damn good chance of becoming president. So what we're talking about is not the inevitable being stopped, but the inevitable only being delayed. So that's the way I would look at it. And I think that it will be maybe a matter of no more than a week or so before we forget about all this. We start concentrating on the other risks. We've been talking about North Korea. I think that risk is going to come back, and I think that's going to hit us in spades. The EU is a continuing deteriorating situation. And I think what we've seen is we've sort of got over a speed bump, if you like, in that downhill run. And that's the way I'd look at all these things. Eventually, the thing is going to collapse. I have no doubt about that, because it is so, if you like, it is so wealth destructive that it will not survive in the long run. But I think that's the way I would look at it. This is a process which is ongoing, rather than suddenly we're going to have a crisis and the whole thing's going to end.
Now, as everyone knows, your country, the UK, has decided to leave the European Union. Did you want to give us an update in the progress they've made with Brexit? I know just last week, the UK's Prime Minister, Theresa May, was asking for the elections to be held sooner, so then Brexit negotiations would go more smoothly. So did you want to give us an update on the state of Brexit right now?
Yes, certainly. It didn't surprise me at all that Theresa May called an early general election. If I'd been in her shoes, while the Labour Party, who were the main opposition, were in such disarray, I would have called an election as well. It looks like she will have a majority which could be anything between 70 and 130 seats. So that will allow her to pursue Brexit more constructively, with more authority as far as Brussels is concerned, because they will see that politically she's in a very strong position, rather than in a position of having to negotiate back in the House of Commons in order to achieve a position. The other thing that's going to come out of this, I believe, is that some of the Scottish Nationalist Party are going to lose their seats in the House of Commons. And that will defuse a lot of the aggression out of Nicola Sturgeon, who is continually pushing for, we've got to remain in the EU. We need to have our independence so that we can stay in the EU, all this sort of stuff. It's not actually that convincing, but I think that if Nicola Sturgeon was to lose, or her party was to lose anything between, say, 5 and 15 seats in the House of Commons, then I think that would take the wind out of the nationalist sails. So you've got two very, very good reasons to have this now. The other thing I think about it is that with 5 years to run, the Boundary Commission does need to look at how the constituencies are constructed and maybe reduce the number of Scottish seats in the House of Commons simply on the basis that powers have been transferred to Edinburgh, and there has been no reduction in the representation to take account of that. And I would expect, I mean, if I was Theresa May, I would be on that one, and I would get the Boundary Commission to report on how Westminster ought to be adjusted for the fact that all these powers have been devolved to Edinburgh, and an awful lot of what goes on in Westminster has actually got absolutely nothing to do with Scotland. It is something that needs to be addressed. Of course, you can only really do that when you've got a decent majority, for the very simple reason that you get an awful lot of pushback from the various vested interests who want to continue to have their representation in Westminster.
Now, just before we let you go, I was going to ask you one last thing. So even though Brexit hasn't officially, gone through yet, and the UK is still part of the European Union right now, has it impacted the economy, just, the knowledge that that is what's going to happen at all?
Well, the impact has been really absolutely predictable. Ahead of the Brexit vote, businesses were lobbying hard for us not to leave the EU because, businesses are businesses, and that's the sort of thing they do. They're into lobbying rather than production, as it were. And now that that is past, we've got to get on with life. So what happens? You find that people like Renault, Nissan are investing in a new Nissan car in Sutherland. It's the most efficient car plant in Europe. We have that in the northeast. Again, General Motors have sold their UK subsidiary to a partially state-owned French manufacturer. We're finding that all of the companies that sort of turned around and said, well, I think it would be terrible if Britain left Europe, they're investing again. So, in other words, they tried to lobby. The lobbying didn't work. They've got to get on with it. That's what's happening. The economy here has also been running pretty strongly. Things are pretty good here. And it's very, very simple. When people go about their business, we may not like the government. We may not like this. We may not like that. But at the end of the day, we go about our business. And, consequently, all the sort of predictions that the UK economy would collapse if we voted Brexit, that's gone. So there is a new confidence, if you like, in government as a whole. And the question now is, will they have the guts to pursue a genuine free trade agreement? If they did that, then I think this country would have a role in the world. And by that, I mean a role encouraging free trade. But if they bottle it, then I think it would be a great pity. It would be an opportunity missed.
All right. Well, Alasdair MacLeod, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last insights? And where can they find you online?
I think I'll just leave it as to where you can find me online. My writing appears on Gold Money under the Insights column. So if you go to Gold Money and into the Wealth section, you'll find all our research there and my Insight articles, which are published every Thursday, sort of, I suppose, late morning Eastern time on Thursdays. You'll find me there.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for your time, Alasdair.
That was my pleasure.